Welcome to another episode of Coming Up Next, the podcast. Thanks for streaming or downloading the show. And if you're not already subscribed, you can subscribe at comingupnext.com.au, where if this is your first time listening, you can also find links to all of the other previous 145 episodes of the show. Thank you to last week's guest. Thank you to Mary Poplin. If you are interested in visual effects or the post-production process or filmmaking in general, or you just enjoy listening to these conversations, check out last week's episode with Mary Poplin to get an inside look at how one would start a career in visual effects. Coming up this Saturday, the 7th of April, if you're in Melbourne, is the first ever OzFlix Independent Film Awards, or the Aussies. And the man behind that, or one of the men behind that, is Ron Brown, and he is my guest this week. Ron has been working in the film industry for over 40 years, and he's worked on some 1,400-odd productions across various production roles. And I wanted to speak with Ron because I wanted to find out what it was that he wanted to do when he set out to create OzFlix, which you can find at ozflix.tv, which is the first online streaming service dedicated entirely to Australian content. And sort of beyond that, why he wanted to start an independent film awards. So we're going to talk about that. We talk about his career. We talk about the usual stuff, and we're going to talk about it right now. Looking over your career history, I was kind of stunned to see that, you know, over the course of what's been now sort of 42, 43 years working in the film industry, that you've worked in over 1,000 productions across every production area available.
It's actually probably, I had 1,000 productions listed. I was keeping track at about 1,000, and I must admit now my estimate is it's 1,400 plus, but I've got to be honest and say that I no longer track everything and keep a sort of a bio with every film listed. But look, I have, it's 45 years now, and I have actually, I have made nearly 1,500 pieces of content as a producer, director, writer, editor. Some of them I've shot, some of them I've sound mixed, some of them I've even, believe it or not, music supervised. I have a multi-skilled kind of an approach to filmmaking. I was just interested in everything. I just wanted to get into the whole thing and find out as much as I could about all the different areas. And to be honest, some of them I've not rated myself very highly in until more recent times, when I've kind of looked back on stuff and thought, actually, yeah, I didn't do a bad job of that. Although at the time I kind of was looking up to others in the industry, both here and internationally, and thought, oh, gee, I wish I could be as good as him. But looking back on it, I actually don't think I did a bad job. And then I used to actually, the first two feature films that I made, that I co-directed with my wife and creative partner, I wouldn't light them. I'd lit lots and lots and lots of factual content documentaries and factual TV content over the many years, but I didn't rate myself in terms of movies as a DOP. So I'd camera operate because I like my, I guess I preferred my composition, but I didn't have a strong sense of my own sort of ability in lighting. And then we kind of had a bit of a bad experience with the DOP that we were working with. And on the third feature, my wife said, look, just light it yourself. You know how to light, just light it. And when I look at it back, I'm really pleased with it. So now I kind of, at a very much late point in my career, I now actually think that I can. I'm certainly not Don McAlpine, let alone Nestor Almendros, but I do actually think that I've kind of come to appreciate a bit better over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as you sort of settle into your skin a little bit in creative fields, probably in any field, you start to appreciate, your own work and your own skills and the sort of things that you have done over your career. How I mean, as someone who has been working for so long in the film industry, and in recent times having started up your own digital kind of distribution platform with OzFlix, you've probably seen a hell of a lot of young guns, young kids come through and sort of work their way up, probably to the level where some of them are now very experienced practitioners. How significant is it for you, and how much do you kind of instill in these people when they come to your door to be multifaceted and to try as many different areas of production as possible?
Yeah, okay, good question. Well, look, I honestly think that the most difficult part about making films in Australia is getting a decent budget. And I learned very, very early on that, to be able to employ everybody that you wanted to with all the specialist skills was really beyond my scope for the independence that I demanded. So I guess I just sort of saw it as an economic necessity. I guess I just sort of thought, look, I better master this and know how to do it so that either I can do it myself or I can get, younger people who are less expensive and kind of at least know what they're supposed to be doing and be able to supervise them or provide some guidance to them if they're actually going to be running around at my behest. So, yeah, I just took that as a kind of an economic necessity when I first started, that I should learn all these things. I mean, I had a natural curiosity, but by the same token, I saw it as much in the practical sense as how can I afford a music supervisor? Maybe I just better find out about what's involved in that, or a sound designer, or a color grader, or an animator, or a special, all of the things that I've taught myself over the years. I guess I've done pretty much out of a practical necessity. But in the second part of your question, which is, when I'm approached by young people, look, since my daughter went to film school and 27 young hopefuls entered the course, and 2 years later there were I think there were maybe 25 graduates. A couple dropped out along the way, but at the end, only 2 of them, and Rebecca, my daughter, was one of them, and there was another chap who went and worked in some kind of, I think it was like, I would say like wedding films or real estate films or something kind of fairly pedestrian, unfortunately. Not to take anything from people who do that work for a living, but I mean, it's not Hollywood, So I kind of I thought, well, those two people have got a job. They're making a living out of this industry, but the other 23 drifted off into other areas, and it was kind of tragic. I felt that all these people's their hopes had been sort of built up. B, they'd actually spent time at the taxpayer's expense learning these things, not of their own, because it was a TAFE based course rather than a university course, so you didn't have to pay much for it. I'm sure the overheads of the course were greater than the fees, and these folks gave 2 years of their life to this training and came out and there were no jobs for them. And I thought, well, there's something terribly wrong there, and that was to me partly about the way the course was structured and what the implicit direction of the training was. But I also thought, what's lacking here is that there is nowhere, I guess, for a lot of the content that people make to really go with any permanence. So the OzFlix thing was very much, the OzFlix agenda was very much about creating a way for people's content to be put up there, aggregated into a way that sort of made it, I guess, economically feasible to store it and sort of provide it to people without it being, let's say, a sort of a government a government archive, and and giving, I guess, hope to people that, look, if you come out of film school and you want to make something, here's a place where you can find some audience. And I think there's an audience for every film. So I guess I do encourage people when they knock on my door, I do say, go and make it. We'll put it up. We'll show it. Because I think even though at the end of the day, there's a range of quality and a range of experience in the films that we stream from very, very, early emerging people who are still learning their craft right through to brilliant work. At the same time, it's very, very, very inexpensive to store and very inexpensive to stream. So it's not as though, we can't afford to do it. We can afford to store it and we can afford to stream it. And as I said, there's an audience for every film.
I guess it makes you so much more employable to be able to do all of these things. If you can shoot and if you can cut, then you're more likely to, get on the sets to then be able to learn to direct or whatever the case may be.
Oh yeah, look, certainly. When I first got to Melbourne, I was raised in Sydney, and I did my apprenticeship in TV stations in Sydney. And when I first got to Melbourne, I was actually working on a show at a TV network, and then that show folded up 3 months later, and I was pretty much unemployed. And I had the prospect of going back to Sydney or staying in Melbourne, and I thought Melbourne was nice. I'd stay, and so I had to kind of start, creating work for myself, if you like. There's no question whatsoever that because I was so multi-skilled, I could swing a boom, I could record sound, I could mix sound in a studio, I could camera assist, and I could edit. I was a very, very quick editor, even at a young age. I was in full employment at all times. I'd go from thing to thing, but I was rarely out of work. So, being multi-skilled was a big help in that respect. But in later life, as a filmmaker, I made a TV series about 8 years ago, and it was spread out over 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5 actually, that I was making it, called The Chefs of the Great Hotels of the World, in which I would travel around the world and stay in luxury hotels and interview the chefs and film them cooking their signature dishes and put together a sort of a half-hour episode around that hotel, that chef in that country and its cuisine. And I was the producer, I was the director, I was the cameraman, I was the sound recordist, I was the writer when I got home and the narrator, and I was actually the on-camera talent. So when I would go to Istanbul, I literally would set the camera up on a tripod, roll the camera, run around the front and do the to-camera stand-up at the beginning of the episode, run back around and cut and watch that back. And if I needed a second or a third or a fourth take, I'd run and do it again and again until I got a take I was happy with. And I'd do that for the opener and the closer, and then I'd come home and write a narration and record that, literally record that in my own editing room, with the same, exact same radio mic that I used on location. And I would... That was a one-man TV show. It sold in 47 countries around the world. So that was completely only possible because I was able to do all that stuff because I had, the technical chops, but also the confidence, I guess, to be able to pull it off. And, that screened on SBS in Australia and 46 other countries. And I guess I'd have to say that you can't do that. You don't have that level of independence unless you've got quite a lot of different strings to your bow, really. And I'm not saying. Look, I don't want people to misunderstand and think I'm saying how clever I am about this. I actually, I worked hard to learn those skills, and I think most people can. Most people can master those things. It's not impossible for people to learn to shoot, record sound, edit, and so on well. And I meet lots of young people now who have really got that message and have the chops across a whole range of skills. It's certainly not me alone. It's a thing that some people do embrace, and I think it's terrific. Yeah, it does certainly makes you a lot more employable too.
Yeah, I had Philip Noyce on not long ago, and he said, yep, you don't need that much skill to make movies. It's actually all about your imagination. All you need is a little bit of experience, and then the rest is about applying your imagination. And whether that's, shooting The Quiet American, or whether that's creating a docu-series about, touring around the world and speaking with chefs in luxury hotels. It's sort of how far can you push your own limitations, and the skills are kind of, I guess you just build them up from experience, really.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to admit, I was whenever a new software, certainly when everything went digital, I did start out in television when obviously there was 2-inch videotape and later 1-inch videotape in those days, and there was 16mm film in the news department and in the documentary and current affairs sort of areas. Subsequently, when I left television and started freelancing, I was working on 35mm film, features and 35mm TV commercials and stuff as well, and continued, throughout the 40-odd years to embrace each of the new technologies as they've come along. And I'm a bit of an early adopter in that sense. When something comes along that looks like it's promising, I will leap in. I won't stand back and go, oh yeah, look, I'm happy with what I'm doing. I'll be like, well, if this is coming, I should know about it. So I would definitely push myself forward to try to find out about it. And when we got to the digital revolution, when it was possible to actually shoot digital, edit digital, and the laboratory was not necessary, and you could start to realize very quickly that you could do all your post production, you could do all your effects, all your titling, all your transitions, everything could be done on screen and in the software. And this was an epiphany early on. I mean, now we take it for granted, and the new generations of filmmakers coming through film schools and stuff probably don't even realise, how easy it is compared to how it used to be. But when we transitioned out of waiting weeks and weeks and paying, literally tens of thousands of dollars to have your film stock and processing and work prints and editing materials created in the laboratory, and then you did your editing, and then later you sent them all back to the laboratory for more tens of thousands of dollars. Now you can literally buy a $1,000 software package that does all of that, and you do it on your laptop computer or your desktop computer. It is insanely revolutionary, and it does empower people. It definitely allows people to go out and make anything and do it in a really, really, I guess, a painless way compared to the way it used to have to be. So for me, that's been, I guess, one of the most rewarding aspects of filmmaking, is that I finally got to the point now where, you can just pick up the camera, go and shoot it, bring it back and edit it, and the whole thing can be done in your own hands for virtually nothing, and it is down to your imagination. That is where we're at, definitely.
Yeah, totally. And, if you're like Steve Soderbergh, you go and just shoot it on your iPhone because that's what's available and that's what the technology is.
Yeah, look, I actually would like to, I've actually written a post recently on Facebook calling for writers to approach thriller script writers to approach me, because I've got an idea about just a kind of a general idea for a movie shot on a phone, but where the phone is the central character of the film. So I'm looking to commission that script this year. But I think, yeah, totally. I think we'll be seeing more and more quality in the recording technology in phones, and I think people will be able to make movies on their phones to a really high standard in no time.
So, I mean, you mentioned before, you collaborate with your wife, Ruth, and I know that your daughters, Beck and Bella, are both working in the film. It seems like, you kind of keep it all in the family when it comes to your work. And I know that your dad was a senior vice president for Universal in Australia and in the Pacific. What was it like to kind of grow up with film so entrenched in your kind of DNA?
It was a family thing, definitely. Look, my dad went to America when I was 3 years old. He took the whole family. We went on a boat in those days to America, and we went to California, and he got a job. Eventually, he was doing various things, promoting musical concerts and things like that, and as a producer, and then he eventually was offered a job in the MCA talent agency before they bought Universal Studios, and it became MCA Universal. And when my dad eventually transitioned from MCA to Universal and became a sales and distribution executive at Universal. He just used to come home. I mean, apart from the fact that we lived in Los Angeles for a few years there, and I kind of became, a bit of, well, I kind of certainly had that sort of, the culture of the place started to become second nature to me. But more importantly was the fact that when we moved back to Australia, and he headed up Universal in Australia, and then eventually New Zealand, South Pacific, Southeast Asia, Japan, and then eventually he was in charge of Universal sales and distribution worldwide. So, and he moved back to the Black Tower at Universal Studios, and he was in charge of the whole world. But I grew up with a regular sort of weekend ritual, if you like, where we had a 16mm projector and a big screen and a good sound system in our living room at my parents' house. And on Friday and Saturday nights, my dad would bring home 16mm prints of the latest films, whether it was an Alfred Hitchcock film or whatever it was that he was going to be releasing a few months down the track. He'd get these preview copies in 16mm that they'd send out to their branch offices around the world, and he'd bring those home and watch them, and I'd sit and watch them, and I'd be able to invite school friends. And I've still got friends that sort of say, "I'll never forget going to your parents' house on a Saturday night and watching a film 3 months before it came out to in the cinemas for the rest of the community." No, that I did grow up with, and I saw thousands of films actually as a young man, I guess, as a teenager, as a young adult. Literally, I've seen thousands of films, which it makes me very, very boring to go to the movies with, because when I actually sit and watch a film, I tend to be distracted now by, well, first of all, the plots. I certainly sort of, in 5 minutes, I can pretty much see exactly where I think the plot's likely to go, and I'm kind of a bit of bad company in that sense. And then I can also see all the references. So I'm one of those kind of people who, watch a film and go, "Oh, okay, that's like the scene in Rope. Oh, that's like the idea from," and I just, "Oh, that's just a rip off of The Birds." Or, I mean, I'm just using Hitchcock analogies here, but just that whole sort of seeing everything in every film as being something from somewhere. And I'm not the only person who can do this. There's lots and lots of really good film buffs, a lot of critics, who see absolutely everything, do this kind of thing too. But it makes me now, it's actually a help in terms of when somebody sends me a script, and we've had 100 scripts submitted to us in the last month since we started the OzFlix Originals project. We're going to actually start making films for OzFlix. But when people send me scripts now, I can pretty quickly scan through a script and sort of see how much originality, if you like, in it, and how I think it is going to play out. That's very useful, seeing a lot of films. So I do urge filmmakers. I'm actually a bit surprised and frequently disappointed when people come to me from film school and I'll go, "Oh, yeah, so you remember the thing in Casablanca?" And they'll be like, "What?" And I'll be like, "You've seen Casablanca?" And they're like, "No, I don't think so." And so I do have these, more and more as I get older now, I do have these kind of, they must look at my face, and I must have this terribly disappointed look on my face where it's like, where I sort of appear to be shaming them because they haven't seen films that were made 70, 80 years ago, but I kind of can't help, I kind of can't help that, or I'll fortunately, look, a lot of the good people have seen a lot of stuff, but there's certainly people who kind of cross my threshold who haven't seen any of it. What's that book, The 1,000 Films You've Got to See Before You Die? Well, yeah. So I think everybody at film school should be given that book when they enroll. Here's the 1,000 films to see before you die, and go and do it. Go and actually sit through Eisenstein and D.W. Griffith and then on to, everybody else that was, go and see Easy Rider. How many people haven't seen Easy Rider? I'm like, this revolutionized Hollywood. This was the film that these guys made for nothing, on kind of the smell of an oily rag. They went out there with their sort of their mates and shot this film and put it all together. And when it went on in the cinema, it was absolutely and completely captured the zeitgeist of young people and the revolutionary fervour in young people in the society at the time in the mid-60s, and completely changed everything. And people don't even know that and haven't watched it. So I kind of I do find myself, as I get older, sort of evangelising these classic films and being terribly disappointed when filmmakers come to me that haven't seen this stuff. So anyhow, that's just that I suppose is a problem of being older and having watched stuff for a long time.
I mean, yeah, but I think there's certainly some merit in what you're saying. You know, if you're going to endeavor to get into a film industry or an industry, you know, you should understand the history of it and what's come before you, you know, so that you can create and evolve, and you're not creating something in a bubble.
I find that absolutely. Look, I must say, I find that some people genuinely put elements into their films that have been done, you know, before, and I kind of go, oh, is that an homage to Busby Berkeley's, you know, Gold Diggers of 33? And they're like, what? And I'm like, Busby Berkeley, you know, do you know who Busby Berkeley is? And they go like, no, I don't think so. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that obviously wasn't an homage. It was just some similar idea. But then other people will come with stuff and I'll say, oh, okay, that's right. Okay, so that's like, you know, that's like Tom Cruise in Top Gun. And they'll be like, oh, you recognise that, did you? And yeah, so that does happen. But you know, definitely people should watch. I think if you want to be a filmmaker, you should fill up every conceivable spare moment watching films. But go back and watch all the classic films. Don't. I mean, I do meet a lot of people who've seen every iteration of every Marvel comic and DC, you know, comic film that's been released. You know, they've seen all the Spider-Mans and all the sort of, you know, Batmans and all that. And I'm kind of like, oh yeah, okay, but you know, have you gone back and watched Psycho? You know, have you seen Psycho? Did you watch that? No. Oh yeah, I think they had it on in my film course, but I don't think I went to the screening, you know. So, but I think look, the thing about kind of what you watch and what you want to watch is eventually, I guess people's tastes mature. You know, you at first when you're emerging, when you're 18, it's quite different to when you're 25, and that's quite different to when you're 35. And I suppose as you get to a point of deciding that you're serious about this, you know, whether that's, and it happens at different ages. Some people kind of do a film course because they think it's a cool thing to do and they'd like to be a filmmaker, but they don't really actually have any great understanding of what a career as a filmmaker might mean. Unfortunately, that happens in a lot of careers. I've met a lot of lawyers now and others who've come out of their courses and accountants and others who've said to me, "Oh, if I really knew what accounting was, I'd have never chosen it." You know, I just thought I'd be able to make a lot of money, you know, but it's the most boring, horrible job, and I hate it. And you know, so I mean, you do meet people, but if you want to be a filmmaker, there's nothing actually good about you know, taking on a career as a filmmaker, except unless you love to do it. You know, it's not. I actually think there's a big misunderstanding, and a lot of people think that it's a cool career, that, you know, you might get a lot of attention, or you might get a lot of prizes and awards, or make a lot of money, or meet a lot of girls. I don't know what people hope for when they embark on a film. But the best reason is that you actually love doing it, and it doesn't matter if you don't make any money, don't meet any girls, or, you know, aren't perceived as being the coolest guy on the block. If you really love doing it, then you should just go and do it. I actually think it's a really, really hard career. I think it's in this day and age, there are so many people that want to be filmmakers now. It's like everyone wants to be a filmmaker. I have 3 daughters, as you said before, and I'll come back to that in a second. But my 3 daughters, as they were going through school, high school in particular, and even at university, they'd get to talking to their friends, and yeah, my dad's a film producer and whatever, and they'd be, oh, I want to be a filmmaker. Could I meet him? So this kind of happened. It started as a trickle, and then it grew to an absolute deluge. And it just kind of, I thought, well, when I was a teenager, when I was at school, when I was growing up, everyone wanted to be a rock star. They wanted to play guitar or write songs and sing in a band. That was the kind of the cool job. But nowadays it seems to have shifted. We're a generation down the track where now sort of everyone has to be either an actor or a filmmaker of some persuasion. So it seems to be the aspirational job for just about everybody these days. But unless you really, really, really love films, I don't think you should do that. I think you should go watch a bunch of films, start with that, and then form some views around what kind of films you'd want to make, and then decide, to go and be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Start it. We need to start people earlier. That whole question about visual literacy and all that sort of stuff. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet. As far as my two daughters are concerned, you touched on that before. I'm happy to sort of fill in the gaps there. I have three daughters, and one of them's a concert pianist, and she lives in Paris, and she kind of just got interested in classical music very early. There's been no classical music in this household when she was growing up. I listened to rock and pop and some jazz, but she just got interested in classical music, got interested in the piano, and she also learned flute and just progressed really, really quickly with it, and that's the direction that she went in. But our second daughter, Beck, she said at a very early age, at around about the age of about 12, could I come to work with you in the holidays and see, what you guys do? And I was like, sure. And she really enjoyed it. And by the age of, I guess, 17, she decided that, maybe 16, maybe even 15, she decided that she wanted to do film and TV work of some sort. She wasn't exactly sure, but she liked the whole idea of that. And Bella, our youngest daughter, who's now a writer and a very accomplished one, she had no idea what she wanted to do right through school and almost actually right through uni, although she did do cinema studies, obviously, and literature at uni, but she didn't, and she enjoyed writing, but she didn't have a clear, well-formed view of herself as a writer. The thing I was going to say about my daughters is that, they just, I guess, in much the same way as I did, because my father was in the industry and I really enjoyed watching films, I think my daughters were exposed to the same thing. And then by the time Rebecca decided, yes, she had a grandfather in the film industry and a father in the film and TV industry. And we were both in different fields. My dad was in distribution. I was a filmmaker. So she kind of got quite a broader view, I guess, of what goes on. And she's really, at the moment, I mean, she's worked as a producer, she's worked as a director at the ABC, directing news and live, broadcast. She's now working at Charmel Films, Natalie Miller's company, and she's in charge of the distribution there at this stage. So she's kind of moved into distribution for a while to learn that. I mean, it's she's still kind of finding different areas of the industry interesting and is on quite an eclectic kind of quest. Hasn't sort of focused down onto any one particular aspect of the industry to work in. She's still kind of learning. Bella's determined to be, to continue with the writing, I think. So, but yes, it's sort of a third generation now. So, it's one of those. It's one of those things. It's a good industry to be in if you are if you're creative and you enjoy doing it, because as a creative lifestyle, it does cross a lot of different creative fields. It crosses visual arts and it crosses costume and it crosses visual arts in terms of the sound and the sound design and the music areas. All the different areas that filmmaking involves. You can kind of slot in lots and lots of different ways there. Even makeup and special visual effects and practical effects, and there's so many areas. I'm very pleased. I've got two daughters in the industry. I'm very proud of them.
And I guess they're pretty lucky that they had a dad who could, I guess, take them on set and kind of show them and encourage them, or kind of massage them into the realities of what a life in film would be. Do you remember, actually, on that subject, do you remember when you decided that you wanted to get into making films, or do you even remember when you did first make something when you were growing up as a kid, or something that having an experience?
Yeah, I do. So basically what happened was my dad, when we went to America, there was home movies. Home movies had just started to develop. People had 8mm cameras and 8mm cartridges of film. And like a lot of people of my generation, my dad bought one to take home movies on. and the novelty wore off very, very quickly for him, but not for me. I actually this was a really empowering technology. Still photographs were of interest, and I had a stills camera and took lots of still photographs as well. But as I was growing up, the 8mm camera, and I got an 8mm projector eventually, and the ability to splice it together. And then when we got to Super 8 with sort of a sound stripe down the side of it, a magnetic stripe, and we could add music effects and dialogue to it and so on. It was very rudimentary, but it was definitely where I started. I think the two big turning points for me, though, in terms of feeling that I was in the right place, were probably not those days as a teenager with a Super 8 camera or an 8mm or Super 8 camera. The two turning points probably were I started an arts law degree at university, and decided that I wasn't enjoying that, and I dropped out and got a job at Channel 7 as a boom operator sweeping the floor, and rolling cable and all that sort of stuff. And I remember I was paid $37.50 a week, and I thought, well, it's just great to be in a TV station and really kind of where people were making stuff. And I fell in with a guy, a news cameraman, and he was a studio cameraman, and then he went to become a news cameraman. And I also fell in, his name was Ross Flaherty, and then I also fell in with Russell Mulcahy, who went on to make a bunch of movies, who was an editor at Channel 7 News at the time. And we sort of formed up a little kind of posse, and Ross and I went off and made some films. And the first 16mm film I made was actually just visuals that we created and edited together with an Elton John song back in the day, which was called 60 Years On. And I put that film together. I didn't really know too much actually about editing because I was working in the sound department, but I kind of edited it together as best I could and got some tips from the editors there, and put the film together, and eventually submitted it to David Stratton at that stage. David Stratton, this is 1974. And David Stratton was the festival director of the Sydney Film Festival, Sydney International Film Festival, which in those days was running in the Rose Bay Winter Garden. And he chose my film for the film festival in 1974. And I used to go to the film festival every year and see all the Bergman and the Kurosawa and all the films that were on in those days. I'd trot along, and this time for my first 16mm film, it was on at the Sydney Film Festival. So I went along, and I can't remember. I think it played with like a Bergman film or something. It was the short before a Bergman film, and I just thought this was the most amazing validation of my pulling this film together, that it was actually on at the Sydney Film Festival, and I'd kind of felt like, yeah, look, this is great. I feel that I started to feel I was getting to be maybe a part of this, The second one probably was when I got to Melbourne, which was 1975. I hadn't been in Melbourne too long, only a couple of years, when I got a phone call out of the blue. I was an editor by then, and I got a phone call out of the blue from a man called Tony Patterson, and he said, look, I'm in the middle of this film. In fact, I'm nearly at the end of it, but the director keeps making me recut it and recut it and recut it, and I'm going crazy, but I've run out of time because we booked the sound mix and we booked the laboratory, and the film's got a release date, and I need you to come in and help me and sort of finish off all the sound editing and prepare all the sound for the mix and everything. And I said, oh, okay, sure. And that film was Mad Max. Now, at the time, nobody knew what Mad Max was going to turn into. Not Byron Kennedy, not George Miller, not Tony Patterson, not me, and probably not most of the people who worked on it. Well, none of us, to be honest, had any idea that it was going to turn into an enormous global success, that it cost $340,000 to make, and that it was going to make $104 million at the box office. It was going to be a smash in America and in Japan and so on. And obviously nobody predicted that it was going to spawn the franchise that it did. But we were making the film in the same spirit that people make independent films these days, that you come out of film school, or not in George's case, but, in George's case, you come out of med school, but you come out of, you're young, you're sort of full of energy, and you've got enough confidence to sort of, talk people into sort of, coming along with you for the ride, and you sort of make something. And we just didn't know. We didn't know. We were all just kind of there. I mean, in the editing of Mad Max, Luke Buckmaster's recently released a book about Mad Max, making of the first Mad Max film, and he kind of gets it a bit wrong, because he says that Byron edited the film on a homemade editing machine that Byron's dad made on his dad's kitchen table. That's not quite right. I suspect that Byron may have made an assembly of the film, but by the time I got on Mad Max, the film was actually well and truly cut professionally in a professional editing room on a large Prevost machine. It was a 1635 machine, actually. It actually had changeover gears and prisms and stuff, so you could do 16 and 35. But Mad Max was actually shot in 35, of course, but it was edited in 16 millimeter. And the whole film was, all the post-production was in 16 millimeter to save money, and in black and white, by the way, too, to save even more money, so that we never saw the colour film until the film went to the lab for neg matching and final its first answer print. But when I was there and doing the sound, they had a big editing machine, and they were certainly doing it on a very professional level. And Tony was an experienced editor, but he and George didn't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. And Tony actually said to me one night as we were leaving the editing room, we're locking up. George had gone, Byron wasn't around, and just Tony and I were kind of locking up one night. And he turned to me and he said, "Mate, you'll be cutting his next one." So he was sort of determined that he'd already determined that he and George hadn't got along, and he wasn't likely to be editing the next one. But it was a very, very hard film to edit.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say that it wasn't shot with any sense. How can I put this politely? It wasn't shot with any sense of real understanding about how you cover a scene, and how you how it's all going to be later cut together. George had a bunch of really imaginative ideas for where to put the camera to capture the action, but he had no real understanding of a lot of things, including basic things that we take for granted, like crossing the line. There's many, 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 many line crosses in that film where people suddenly appear on the other side of the screen to where you'd have expected them on the reverse, and things like that, because George just said, "No, I want the camera here," and David would shoot it. They'd argue too sometimes, but anyway, when the footage came in, Tony, it was hard, really hellish to cut, and interestingly, it transcends that. I mean, when you watch Mad Max now, it transcends that. The characters so iconic, the shots are so great, the story is so sort of simple and graphic, and the sound, the music, everything else is there. It's the performance, I guess, too, of Mel. The whole thing is really very, very captivating, even though the technique of the director at that point in time. I mean, George has gone on to be a very, very good director in terms of his understanding of all of that stuff, I believe now. But at the time, he really was learning. It was film school for him, and it was hard to cut. But we got it finished, and we went off to the mix. I'm not in the credits of the film, unfortunately, because Tony called me on a Sunday afternoon and got me in on Monday morning, but they'd sent all the credits off to the lab on Friday afternoon because it had to be done all optically, and that was going to take a few weeks. So they thought they'd had all the crew worked out by then, and they'd had it all figured out and sent all the credits off, and I'm not in the credits. But anyway, George and I have talked about this since, and he said, "Yes, I remember you. So I guess that's enough validation. But I was definitely there. We edited it, by the way. We edited it in this little room. It was a sort of a terrace house in Glen Huntly Road, Elstonwick, above a massage parlour, above a brothel, and next door was an Indian restaurant. So we kind of all through the day, and particularly in the early part of the evening, There were lots of gorgeous Indian food smells, curry smells wafting in and out of the editing room. And at the far end of the corridor the upstairs corridor, the man who used to run the black and white processing machine and I think that he was there because they decided to make the movie and do black and white work prints. But when they decommissioned the black and white processing machine at Cinevex Laboratories in Elstonwick, he'd bought the machine for peanuts, or had been given it, and he'd installed it and was running it as a black and white processing facility down the back of this upstairs, this story above the massage parlour. So the smells of all the chemicals from the processing machine would waft in from one direction, and the curries would all sort of drift in from the other direction. It was quite I'll never forget that. To this day I can't forget the sort of the aroma and the smells surrounding the editing of that movie.
Yeah, I'm sure the audio from the downstairs made it quite a sensorial feast.
Well, that was Mad Max. But I mean, those two things, and after Mad Max, I'm like, well, I guess I'm in the film industry. They were my short film in the 1974 Sydney Film Festival, my first 16mm short, and the Mad Max experience. And then after that, I was kind of pretty much convinced that this is what I had to do, and just kind of pursued it.
It's an incredible time to kind of be working and meeting people, and I guess just from a kind of historical point of view, an incredible time to have been starting out and to be having these experiences.
Looking back on the times, as you say, it is that the Australian film industry renaissance, which was sparked effectively by a movement, the filmmakers cooperative movement. There was a filmmakers cooperative in Sydney and a filmmakers cooperative in Melbourne, primarily, where indie filmmakers who'd been running around in the late 60s with 16mm cameras and were starting to make longer form content. But we were catapulted into a film industry essentially by Philip Adams and Barry Jones putting their heads together. And Barry at this stage had come out of being a school teacher and was a state politician, I think, a Labor politician in Victoria. And Philip, of course, was a creative director of a wholly Australian-owned advertising agency in St Kilda Road. And they put their heads together. Philip had made a film, and he realised that the only way the film industry was going to get off the ground in Australia was by pushing hard to get some infrastructure into the industry and some government support. So he and Barry put their heads together, and between those two men, they literally forced the federal government to a series of initiatives over a couple of years, very, very quickly, which we should all be grateful for. One of those was the starting of the Australian Film and Television School, which is obviously now the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. They also started the Australian Council for the Arts. They also started the Australian Film Development Corporation, which begat the Australian Film Commission, which begat Screen Australia. And they also got their heads together with Don Dunstan, who was the Labor Premier of South Australia at the time, and got the South Australian Film Corporation going, which then forced all the other states to have an equivalent body. So Film Victoria was next, and then the Screen New South Wales body, and Queensland, WA, South Australia was the first. And that was Barry Jones and Philip Adams' initiative too. So 4 major institutions that now continue to underpin or drive, if you like, the investment, the marketing and development of film and television in this country, all down to those two men, Barry Jones and Philip Adams, which is why they're my patrons, my founding patrons of the Australian Film Future Foundation Limited, our not-for-profit, that we started a year or so ago to restore and digitise all the lost Australian films. But they're terrific, and they were exciting times, those early 70s, 70, 71, 72, 73. By the time I got to Melbourne, I joined the Melbourne Filmmakers Cooperative and got involved in the whole kind of independent filmmaking scene. People were making everything from experimental short films to documentaries to even to feature films. It was great times, and we all did it together. We did it in the spirit of sort of, pooling our equipment and pooling our resources and crewing on each other's films. It was Phil Noyce. Phil Noyce and I were friends back in those days. Phil was working at the Commonwealth Film Unit in Linfield in Sydney when I was up there working at first at Channel 7 and later at the ABC, but he was in my social circle. I knew him at that stage quite well, and others. Similarly, it was a very cooperative. I guess that underpins, just to bring it full circle, that kind of underpins the philosophy behind OzFlix, really. I've always yearned to get back to those days. I've always yearned for filmmakers to be able to work in that sort of in that way. And I know small groups of people do form up. I appreciate that people coming out of film school often team up with 2 or 3 friends and sort of get things done, and that's terrific. But I guess I wanted to have something even bigger, a real wagons in the circle. When Alan Finney and I first talked about OzFlix, my idea was that it was a real opportunity to finally get all the wagons in a circle again and get all the films in one place and get all the filmmakers engaged and give them a vehicle, give them a way to get their content out, not only across Australia but globally, because OzFlix is actually a global streaming service that you can watch anywhere in the world. But that was it was trying to capture that lightning in a bottle again, I guess. OzFlix very much harking back to the spirit of the filmmakers cooperatives of the early 70s.
It makes sense that, given how you've seen the industry evolve over such a sustained period of time, that you would kind of be very well situated and placed to see where the puck is going, so to speak, and see what the trend will be. And you've got the first Aussie Awards coming up very soon.
We do. Saturday the 7th of April. It's only about 10 days away now. But yes, the idea there is, again, after last year, there was a couple of phone calls came to me around the idea that independent films were never going to get a look in at the big awards nights because their budgets were too humble or their distribution was too small scale, and that it was really frustrating to make a great film for $1 million and for it to be a very strong and well-made film creatively. People put a lot of blood, sweat and tears and passion in it, and it was a strong and well-regarded film critically, but that it was never going to win a prize at the big kind of awards. And my kind of initial response to that was just to say, well, I guess we probably just need an independent film award. We need something that recognises that. Now, having said that and thinking back on it, there used to be independent film awards, and IF magazine, Inside Film magazine, used to actually sponsor them for some years. I actually never participated in them, I must say, but I know that there were Inside Film magazine independent film awards for some years, but they seem to have disappeared. That seemed to have evaporated. Maybe they decided not to keep it going. It is a hard thing to do, I must say. I've got to be honest and say that I've spent the last couple of months really a lot of my time, energy, thoughts, and I guess even my credibility, if you like, my social cred has gone into kind of sort of pulling this together and staging these awards. I've got a great team, a small team of people here who are pitching in to make it happen too. But the idea, I guess, with the awards is that we do under $5 million. We do need to recognise those films more. And put more, I guess, not only more love around them, but also sort of more marketing around them. And I think the awards are a good way to do both of those things. They're attracting a lot of interest in terms of love. We had 106 films entered this year, which is absolutely staggering. We estimated we might have, we thought we might have 30 or 40. We've got 106 documentaries, feature films, web series, right across the board. We worked hard to get the Indigenous filmmakers involved, so we've got a really good showing in the Indigenous area as well. We've gone out to sponsors. We found good support from sponsors to help us meet the costs of running the event, and all the proceeds from the event will go to the Australian Film Future Foundation, to the not-for-profit for the restoring of films. So it's been a labour of love. It's called the OzFlix Awards. We're a sponsor. We're a naming rights sponsor. We've put in a vast amount of money, and we're also giving a prize, a $250 account, if you like, a free $250 voucher to every winner in every category in the 20 categories on the night. So we've had some good support from Screen Hub, from Star Now, from a number of other industry organisations that provide services to the industry, like Sound Firm, who are in the post-production facilities area, and a few others. They've all jumped on board and given us money and prizes and things like that. So that's been really great. That your first year, you start anything in the first year, and you often think, well, people may need to see it before they commit to supporting it. So maybe not till the second year. But people have been really, really, Alistair, they have been really, really passionate for this from as soon as we announced it. People just wanting to be, wanting to enter their films, wanting to be involved in the jury. There's 35 jurors, and these jurors, including Phil Noyce and Jill Armstrong and Nadia Tass and Philippe Morat and Brian Trenchard-Smith and, a long list, documentary makers like Jen Peedham and Kitty Green, lots and lots of producers, great composers like David Hirschfelder and Nigel Westlake and Caitlin Yeo, and cameramen and just everybody, it's a super jury, I call it, 35 really terrific people there. And then on top of that, we had obviously, I guess, a big job at the end of the day with 35 jurors, 20 categories and 106 films, the tallying of all the scores and working out the judging system, the voting system and stuff was one of the biggest challenges. But that'll, as we go forward, I think that'll all kind of settle down really, really well. By the second year, it'll go very, very smoothly, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I hope that hope this is the first of many, because I think Australia needs these kind of accolades and recognition for the hard work that goes into making these low-budget independent films, because it's kind of it's the bloodline of the industry. Not every film's going to be a Mad Max, and by Mad Max I mean Fury Road or a Happy Feet or an Oddball. There's got to be space for the That's Not Me, and
yep.
Legend of Ben Halls. These kind of films that are really, in some ways, flying under the radar, but in other ways are actually, making bigger waves on a global scale for up-and-coming filmmakers.
What's interesting about those films, of course, is they're punching way, way, way above their weight, because these are films, That's Not Me, which, not that they could ever, they say themselves they could never do it again, but Greg and Alice made that film for under $60,000, and even Ben Hall at $1 million is an insanely great achievement. But the point I think about this that I keep coming back to is the fact that 74% of all the films we make in Australia, and that's a lot these days, are made for less than $5 million. There's only a quarter of the films that we make that are actually over $5 million. Everything else, the three-quarters of all the films we make are under $5 million, and according to Screen Australia report. So, that's really most of the people in this country are running around making those films, those under $5 million films. And as you say, most of those are under $2 million and under $1 million. There's a lot of films. We had a lot of entries under $500,000. So I think, yes, it's a training ground on the one hand, but it's a great inexpensive way to try out ideas. And it's also, at the end of the day, inevitable that people who make successful low-budget films are going to move on ultimately to to the higher levels of the industry. So we should definitely recognise and support. I'm devastated that Screen Australia, when Ruth was the CEO, decided to get out of supporting low budget films. They made a deliberate policy shift away from low budget films and what she disparagingly called credit card movies, and she insisted that they wouldn't be funding any of those, and basically left threw those filmmakers under the bus, if you know what I mean. When I think back on my own filmmaking experience and working with very, very small budgets, you are pushed to use your imagination, you are pushed to use your resourcefulness, and you have to be incredibly patient. You have to be very, very, very imaginative in how you solve problems and do things. And I think there's absolutely no better way to become a good filmmaker than to start by making really, really low-budget independent films. I actually think that's where the best filmmakers are going to come from now and in the future.
Absolutely. And, if you got a phone, you got a camera, so you can, you can just, I guess, start shooting stuff and put it into practice. Thank you so much, Ron, for chatting with me, for telling me, about quite an incredible career. If anyone listening is interested in checking out OzFlix, they can do so at ozflix.tv. If there are any screenwriters out there who've been listening and listened all the way through who might want to get in touch about that thriller screenplay that you have in mind, how can they reach you?
Look, they can just write to us. It's really, really simple. We've got two ways. You can register the project, but you can register the project at our registrations page, but that's a long, complicated URL. What I would suggest is probably if they write to Alexandra, Alexandra, at OzFlix, OZFLIX.net. Alex looks after development here, and she'll field their inquiries.
Fantastic. Ron, I end all of my conversations with the same question. Question is, what makes you silly?
What makes me silly? Golly. Well, I must admit, I probably would say I don't drink and I don't take drugs. So the thing that makes me silliest, I suppose, is when I'm in a room with loud music and really kind of get into dancing to loud rock music. That loud rock music makes me silly.
What's some of your rock of choice?
Oh, gosh, I've got very, very broad taste. Very broad taste. I mean, I can get excited about everything from Simon and Garfunkel through to Metallica, honestly. And a big fan of The Who, big fan of the Beatles, big fan of Led Zeppelin, massive fan of Led Zeppelin. So, yeah, lots and lots in there.
Absolute classics. Thank you so much, Ron.
Thanks, Alistair. All the best.